Today, I'm excited to talk to you about the Hay Wain by John Constable, painted in 1821. This picture has become an icon of the English landscape, reproduced on household goods from wallpaper to biscuit tins. And recently, its association with a nostalgic vision of the British countryside has also seen it become a site of protest. But our familiarity with the image can cause us to overlook some of its finer details, and how Constable's approach to painting this natural scene was radical for its time. But first, let's take a look at the picture. What can we see? Rather than a rural idyll, the Hay Wain is a scene of agriculture and industry in the Suffolk countryside. At the centre, horses and an empty hay wain or wagon are driven through the shallow mill pond by the two men visible on the cart. The track marks in the foreground show us where the hay wain entered the water, and the front wheel, which turns to the right, suggests that it is headed towards the ford and beyond to the fields in the distance at the right of the scene. To the right of the image, a man in a top hat works his way through thick vegetation, perhaps trying to reach the boat that can be seen there. Ducks are gliding through the water, and a black and white dog in the foreground is watching the hay wain make its crossing. In its initial reading, this is a simple scene, but asking what this landscape meant to the artist and how he chose to represent it gives us a more complete understanding. So, where was Constable in his career when he painted this picture, and how was landscape painting viewed at the time? John Constable was born in East Bergholt in Suffolk in 1776, and he would produce paintings of the Suffolk landscape throughout his life. He was largely self-taught, but he studied at the Royal Academy from the age of 24, and exhibited over 100 works there from 1802 until his death in 1837. One of his early mentors, Sir George Beaumont, had a collection of old masterworks which Constable took great interest in. Some of these are now in the National Gallery's collection, such as Rubens' A View of Hetstein in the Early Morning and Claude's Hagar and the Angel. The traditional academic hierarchy of artistic genres still held weight in this period, and it did not benefit landscape painters such as Constable. History painting was at the top, and that referred to works with classical, mythological or biblical subject matter. This was followed closely by portrait painting, which was the bread and butter of a working artist in this period, and then genre scenes or daily life. Landscape painting was considered below this, and then still life. However, the artist Thomas Gainsborough, who was also from Suffolk and had died in 1788, made inroads to challenging that hierarchy, believing landscape to be a worthy genre for artistic exploration, and one that he returned to throughout his career. His work allowed the next generation of artists like Constable more freedom to focus on depicting nature. So Constable would seek to replicate, reference and improve upon the work of old and recent masters with his radical approach and naturalistic style, and this can be seen by looking closely at the Hay Wain and how it was made. So how did Constable create this image? The Hay Wain was the third painting in a series of 6-foot landscapes that the artist set around the River Stour, which he exhibited at the Royal Academy between 1819 and 1825. The second, Stratford Mill, is also held by the National Gallery. While the Hay Wain represents a Suffolk scene, the 6-foot oil on canvas was painted at some speed over 5 months in Constable's London studio. However, it depicted a location which the artist knew very well, and as he said, "I should paint my own places best." The wall visible to the right of the painting is Flatford Mill, which the Constable family had leased for nearly a century. The house to the left still survives today and is known as Willie Lott's Cottage, as Willie Lott was the tenant farmer at the time of the painting's production. Constable had produced a series of small-scale sketches of this location over the years, from at least 1802, along with studies of plants and trees, all of which he drew upon in the construction of the Hay Wain. He also made extensive cloud studies outside, en plein air, and was forensic in his attempts to capture fleeting atmospheric changes and to understand the science of weather, reading recent work by his friend Luke Howard on the classification of clouds. This interest can be seen in the complex and realistic sky in the Hay Wain, with bright light coming through the clouds on the right and gathering dark clouds to the left which suggest incoming rain. The difficulty of relying on sketches to depict a distant location was highlighted in the creation of this painting, as Constable had to ask his brother to contact an acquaintance to send a sketch of the Hay Wain itself. Instead, he was sent an image of a cart whose sides are too low for carrying hay, but may instead have been for transporting wood. Unusually for the time, although not for Constable's landscapes around the River Stour, Constable also created a 6-foot study to work out the full composition on a large scale. Today, this study can be seen in the collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum. It helps us to understand the development of the painting, and confirms that in the foreground a horse and rider have been painted out in the final image and replaced by a barrel. That barrel was then also painted over by the artist, leaving only the black and white dog. What was unusual about Constable's approach to depicting nature? The concept of the painting, a cart crossing through a ford, is a scene well represented in Dutch and Flemish Old Master landscapes. However, Constable developed this subject with his naturalistic style and colouring. Rather than imitating the high level of finish in works by the Old Masters, Constable's handling of paint was loose and broad for the time. And this can be seen in the layered smudges of colour which he uses to represent the leaves on the trees, or the broad sweeps of paint applied by palette knife to create the reflections on the water. Alongside these impressions of nature which draw us into the scene, Constable also demonstrates his remarkable eye for detail in some of those finer elements of the image, and I particularly love the details on Willie Lock's cottage, from the brickwork at the bottom of the building to the broken glass in the lower window pane and the flowers you can see in the top window. Constable was criticised for failing to mirror the darker colours adopted by the Old Masters in their landscapes, some of which resulted from discoloured varnishes. However, it was because he drew directly from nature, and always used it as his reference point, that his palette of greens and yellows was so varied and bright. Similarly, the inclusion of flecks of white to indicate how the sun falls on leaves, grass, and the tiles on the cottage roof brings a freshness and realism resulting from direct observation. However, some contemporary commentators felt this was overdone. Constable often used black, white, and touches of red as accents in his paintings, and this is introduced here through the black and white dog and the red harnesses of the horses. How did this painting come to the National Gallery? The Hay Wain was not the first work by Constable to enter the gallery. That was the Cornfield, which was presented by subscribers in the year of the artist's death in 1837. The list of subscribers included notable figures such as the poet William Wordsworth, the scientist Michael Faraday, and the artist Sir William Beechey. The Hay Wain was donated to the gallery almost 50 years later by Henry Vaughan in 1886, and it was this painting which has reached an extreme level of popularity as an icon of the English landscape. In the first half of the 20th century, as war saw many leave Britain to fight for their country, Constable's work became a stimulus for national pride and nostalgia. This has only continued to the present, and in 2005 the Hay Wain came second in a vote for the nation's favourite painting, after Turner's Fighting Temeraire. More recently, the particular place this painting holds in the visual imagining of rural England has led to it becoming a site of protest for climate change activism. So the Hay Wain is an interesting and an important work, rich with detail, and I encourage you to see it in person if you can, or to visit the National Gallery's website to explore it in further detail.